Hello everyone, welcome to our next training video in 1 John, and now we're in part 2, 1 John chapter 3 verses 4 to 10, and I'd encourage you to read it, but please read it in the light of the previous passage. Because when we look at the context, it's worthwhile to remember as we study this passage that we're still dealing with this idea of what is true, what is false, particularly what is true regarding a true believer versus what is false, a false teacher or antichrist. And we've been given enough information to actually color in what chapter 3 verse 4 to 10 is speaking about. Because looking at the false teachers, what we will learn, have learned and will learn, is that A, they claim to have fellowship with God, that they know God, that they abide even in God, that they're born of God, that they love God. So notice they're making all the right noises. But when you compare with what's really going on, you notice a contradiction. Is A, they deny and reject Jesus as revealed by the apostles. They don't believe that Jesus, the historical Jesus, is the Christ. They deny his incarnation, that God the Son became flesh, or that Jesus, the Christ, came in the flesh. They deny their own sin, that they have no sin. And they hate the church and they love the world. They left the church in love of the world. And so in many ways, their confession, what they say they are, really contradicts their life and their teaching. And so it's important that we recognize this dissonance in false teachers. Conversely, because we see the shadow, we can, Lord willing, understand the light far better. A true believer looks like this. They believe and have fellowship with the apostles. That's from the start. They realize their own sin and need for Jesus' advocacy, his propitiation. They strive not to sin, knowing what Jesus has done for them. They love his people, who they belong to now, and they don't love the world. And what we mean by the world, you remember the study, is the world in opposition to Jesus as King. And their hope is Jesus' return. And the characteristics of a true believer is that they are reborn, which is a theme coming up in our passage. They have this new identity of being children of God, a present reality, of course, being children of God, and a future hope of being made like Jesus, our older brother. And this moves them, this new identity, being empowered by God's Spirit, born of God, and this future hope of being made like Jesus, that moves them to pursue, practice righteousness, and particularly Jesus' righteousness, to be pure as he is pure. And so in many ways, when you keep this contrast that's been happening to sketch between what's true and what is false, a true believer versus a false believer, the Christ versus the Antichrist, we then see this contrast continue in chapter 3, verses 4 to 10. It's a continual contrast that we see. I mean, just to highlight it for you, the couplets, everyone who, notice the repetition of the word, no one, whoever, no one, or all, whoever, all, same word. So notice there's deliberate contrast being made that we can distinguish between who is true and who is false. And so let's look at these contrasts and receive clarity. In verse 3 from our previous passage, everyone who thus hopes in him, the future, purifies himself as he is pure. So notice a true believer strives to purify himself. But notice everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. That is the opposite of purifying yourself, as you just continue practicing sin. And that is called lawlessness. Now this is a rich term. If you look at your leader's guide, you will see a bit of an expansion on this word. It doesn't just mean doing bad things. It's an entire disposition towards Jesus as King, the Messiah, and God's kingdom that is at stake here. A total disregard and rebellion against. And secondly, we need to keep in mind the tense of all these verbs. It's present continuous tense, all of them, if I understand it correctly, which refers to the fact it's an ongoing way of life, a type of lifestyle. Christians don't make it an ongoing way of life, a lifestyle to be in rebellion against Jesus as King and to keep practicing things which displease him, but they make it a habit, a way of life, a continual pursuit to become like him, purifying themselves. That's the first contrast. And that contrast continues in a different way. No one who abides in him, so notice, abiding in him, staying in him, being in his presence, holding on to his truth. Those who stay there, well, they They don't keep on sinning. They don't. Meaning this is their pursuit. They don't want to sin. They purify themselves. They submit to Him. They follow Him. They keep His truth. But then He says, no one who keeps on sinning has either seen Him or known Him. So notice, an almost different way of putting this abiding. To abide in Him is to see Him and know Him as revealed by the apostles. But those who've rejected Jesus, the truth of Jesus as revealed by the apostles, of course they don't know Him, they don't see Him. Therefore they don't abide in Him. Therefore they continue sinning. They continue being lawless in rebellion against Jesus. And so again you can see the contrast between the two. Again, very similar to verse 3, a different way of putting it. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as He is righteous. Notice, as He is righteous. Jesus defines righteousness, and that is what we pursue in this life, to practice that righteousness. But whoever makes a practice of sinning, basically this continual way of rebellion and lawlessness, well, they are not following Jesus at all. They don't know Him. They have not seen Him. They don't abide in Him. In fact, He says they are of the devil. Quite a strong statement. For the devil has been sinning from the beginning. So notice that they are self-delusional. They think they have fellowship with God, know God, abide in God, are born in God, love God. But in fact, the truth is the opposite. They are of the devil and following the devil's way of rebellion, lawlessness, rejecting the truth, not seeing Him, not abiding in Him. And so, expanding on this idea, no one born of God makes a practice of sinning. So those who are born of Him, who are now children of God, who have received the Spirit, who have been changed of heart, their lifestyle, their way of life is not this direction of lawlessness, but this continual striving to be pure, to be righteous as He is. While those who do not practice righteousness, who keep pursuing lawlessness, rejecting the truth revealed by the apostles, not remaining in that truth, and therefore not remaining in the Spirit, well, guess what? They are not of God. They're not born of God. But what's key to see here is to connect a couple of things together. This abiding, seeing, knowing, and being born. So to put it this way, you cannot be born of God if you haven't seen or known Jesus in the Gospels, in the teachings of the apostles. And you cannot abide in Him if you do not see or know Him through the teaching of the apostles. And abiding in Him is to be born of God. Abiding in Him is to see and know Him as taught by the apostles. All these ideas are interrelated. You cannot have the one without the other. You cannot abide with Him without seeing and knowing Him through the teaching of the apostles. You cannot be born of God if you don't abide in Him and have seen and known through the teaching of the apostles. You cannot have the one without the other. And that's what he's pointing out to. And you will see it in someone's lifestyle, the way how they live, what they pursue, what's their general direction of life. It's not following Jesus, it's following the world. And that's how you can distinguish between the two, if that helps. But why is he giving this contrast, distinguishing between true and false? Well, reason number one. Well, the gospel itself shows us that the gospel itself it would be a defeat and basically a contradiction of purpose if this is how we're going to live. Because look why Jesus came. You know that He appeared. Why? To take away sins. And in Him there's no sin. So the reason Jesus appeared was to remove the guilt and shame and sin we've incurred through His own sacrificial death and advocacy. We see that throughout this letter. But also in turn to become like Him, in whom there is no sin. So it contradicts the reason for His first coming if we keep practicing sin, if we pursue rebellion and lawlessness, rejecting Jesus as King. And the second reason, tied to the first, is the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil, not to enforce the works of the devil, to follow his way. And remember what he's saying, because the devil has grip over humanity because of the deception of sin and the consequences of sin, our guilt and shame and the death we deserve. But Jesus has come to take all of those away, to dismantle the devil's grip on us and to take us out of his kingdom of darkness and to put us into the kingdom of his light, to become children of God, not be under his influence and grip in the world. And so again, The gospel itself is the primary motivation why true believers who really believe the gospel will pursue righteousness, will desire to be like Jesus because they get to know him, they abide in him, they're born of him, and so they want to be like their brother. And so yes, those who understand the gospel know this is exactly why Jesus came, for righteousness' sake, his righteousness. Not to enforce sin and keep us in the grip of the devil. And the second reason, tied to this of course, little children, let no one deceive you. There are false teachers who are contradicting the gospel message. There are false teachers who are pushing believers to pursue lawlessness, sin, and deny the apostolic truth, not remain in Jesus, to deny the Spirit of God who regenerates us to follow Jesus, and are calling us to love the world, pursue the world, and actually just follow the devil. And so he's just making it clear, let no one deceive you. Know the gospel. This is why Jesus came. So let no one deceive you. Let no one take you away from the apostolic truth. Because it's only there that you will find assurance. It's only there where you abide in him. It's only there where you see and know him. It's only there where you are born of God. So what do you want people to walk away with? Distinguish between true and false assurance. Sure, you can talk the talk and make a lot of noises, but if your life and your view of the apostles and their teaching the truth contradicts what you're confessing, just know this is false assurance. These false teachers have false assurance. And if those who follow them have false assurance, you want true assurance, which is only found in the gospel, taught and revealed by the apostles, sent by Jesus himself, the word of life. But also understand what it means to be born of God or abide in Jesus, and of course how that relates to the truth. You cannot have the one without the other. But then also grasp the seriousness of sin or pursuing a rebellious, lawless lifestyle, and why Jesus came in the first place. It's to take away sin and to destroy the works of the devil. And that's what you want people to walk away with from this passage in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4 to 10. And please read the Leader's Guide notes on more details.